Hi, I'm Abby from Ratings.com. You're looking for the best LED TV on the market, and you've settled on a Sony. Two models beckon you, the BRAVIA 7 and the BRAVIA 9. You've heard so many things about the BRAVIA 9, how it's the best LED TV ever, how gorgeous it is, but ouch! You look at that price tag. That's an expensive TV. You glance at the BRAVIA 7. It ain't cheap, but compared to the BRAVIA 9, yeah, that's cheap. But how much are you losing by going with the cheaper model? Can you feel confident in that purchase, or should you just eat up that price tag and go for the BRAVIA 9? Stay with us, and we'll tell you. We'll approach this comparison a bit differently. Instead of just emphasizing their differences, we'll also emphasize their similarities. It'll give you a good idea of the BRAVIA 7's performance relative to the more expensive BRAVIA 9. These are two sleek-looking TVs. The BRAVIA 7's bezels have a brushed metallic finish, which looks quite nice, while the BRAVIA 9 has thin metallic bezels around the screen. They have the same feet, which can be set to 4 different positions: a low-high position for height and a wide-narrow position for width. At their highest position, both sets of feet lift the screens about 3.8 inches above the table, but the BRAVIA 9's feet can go lower than the BRAVIA 7's, 1.34 inches on the 9 versus 1.7 on the 7. You can also mount both TVs using their respective VESA mounting points, although neither TV comes with a wall mount included in the box. For cable management, the BRAVIA 9 has plastic covers behind which you can hide your cables, and you can funnel them through the TV's feet, which is a nice touch. The BRAVIA 7 has none of that, no clips and no plastic covers. On the BRAVIA 7, the TV's ports are in a recessed inlet on the left when you're facing the TV from the front, and they're a little bit hard to reach if the TV is flush against the wall, so keep that in mind if you want to wall mount it. The BRAVIA 9, however, feels like it was born to be on the wall. Its ports are on the far left when viewed from the front, making them easy to reach at any point. Nice. As for the inputs themselves, the two TVs are identical. 4 HDMI ports, though only ports 3 and 4 support HDMI 2.1 bandwidth for 4K at 120Hz signals. Port 3 is the eARC port, which means you'll lose one of your 2.1 inputs if you connect the TV to a soundbar or receiver, so that's another thing to keep in mind when shopping for these models. They both pass through all major audio formats from Dolby and DTS and support the popular Dolby Vision HDR format. To round out the package, they have 2 USB ports, including one USB 3.0 port, one digital optical audio out port, one infrared in port, and an antenna connection with ATSC 3.0 support. So enough with the superficial stuff. How do these TVs compare when it comes to sheer performance? The BRAVIA 9 is the highest rated LED TV we've ever reviewed, at least at the time of making this video. It's super bright, colorful, and has tremendous contrast. Obviously it'll blow the BRAVIA 7 out of the water, right? Well, not quite. When it comes to contrast, yes, the BRAVIA 9 has absolutely fantastic contrast. Those blacks rival those found on OLEDs. But the BRAVIA 7 is also absolutely fantastic. The difference between the two isn't immediately obvious. While looking at scenes side by side, you will sometimes notice the BRAVIA 9's edge in contrast, but it's not as noticeable as you'd imagine. It'll be more noticeable when both TVs are in a pitch black room, but frankly, they're both fantastic here. Where the BRAVIA 9 does have the clear edge, however, is in its blooming performance. It has so many more zones than the BRAVIA 7, and they really help when isolating bright highlights without them blooming into the surrounding blacks. There's still some visible blooming at times, and it's more obvious when looking at the BRAVIA 9 from an angle, but overall, it's still fantastic for an LED TV. The BRAVIA 7 performs impressively here, it's just not as good as the BRAVIA 9. The BRAVIA 9 also handles lighting zone transitions much better than the BRAVIA 7 does. On the 7, there's a noticeable halo effect as bright objects move across the screen, and it gets worse the quicker the objects move. On the BRAVIA 9, there's only minor haloing, and the leading edge of quick-moving objects is a bit dimmer than the rest of it, both of which can't really be noticed with most real content. So the BRAVIA 9 does outperform the BRAVIA 7 when it comes to contrast, but the latter is competitive. But surely the BRAVIA 9 must completely blow out the BRAVIA 7 when it comes to HDR brightness, right? Well, again, not quite. Let's get one thing out of the way. The BRAVIA 9 can reach much higher brightness peaks than the BRAVIA 7, but This won't matter one bit if you're not watching content that can take advantage of these peaks. And most content can't. At the time of this video, most HDR content doesn't even hit 1000 nits. And there's very little that exceeds that. If you're watching content that's mastered at 600 nits, the extra grunt of the BRAVIA 9 is basically wasted, and you'll be hard-pressed to notice a difference between the two TVs. So, in short, even though the BRAVIA 9 is indeed capable of hitting much higher peaks than the BRAVIA 7, in most content the two TVs might look very nearly identical. Both TVs are equally as accurate in HDR too, which is great. The same can be said about SDR brightness, although here it's a bit different, as in SDR you can basically set content to be as bright as you want it to be by cranking up the TV's backlight. You can make the BRAVIA 9 noticeably brighter than the BRAVIA 7. But it's unlikely that anyone would feel comfortable having their TV set to 1000 nits in SDR, as it's excessively and uncomfortably bright. You're more likely to set the TV to something more manageable, say 500 or 600 nits, and even that is very bright. The BRAVIA 7 can also easily hit those numbers, as it can sustain a completely white screen at around 700 nits. The BRAVIA 9 here performs slightly better, as it can sustain the same all-white screen at around 775 nits. Ultimately, while the BRAVIA 9 can get brighter here, in normal usage they're likely to end up about the same. Want some more similarities? Both TVs end up equally as colorful, even if, again, the BRAVIA 9 can output much brighter colors at the top end of the brightness scale. In most real content, they'll look similar. Plus, both TVs are equally as accurate in SDR prior to any calibration. They're both excellent, although the BRAVIA 7's whites are lacking in color, while the BRAVIA 9's whites are instead a bit too colorful. The BRAVIA 7's tend to be a bit too dark, while the BRAVIA 9's tend to be a bit too bright. Look at these TVs complementing each other so well. It just brings a tear to your eye. This is where the BRAVIA 9 pulls away from the 7. The 7 uses a semi-gloss coating, and it deals with ambient sources of light beautifully. Feel free to turn on the lights, if the lights aren't set directly opposite the screen. That's because it struggles with direct reflections, and they end up being much bigger on the BRAVIA 7 than on the BRAVIA 9 with its glossy screen coating. The difference is very noticeable. There is, however, some rainbow smearing on the BRAVIA 9, which can annoy some people. But otherwise, it's just much better at dealing with direct reflections than the BRAVIA 7. It means that in bright rooms, you're likely to want to increase the BRAVIA 7's brightness to compensate for the glare. Since the BRAVIA 7 can't get quite as bright as the BRAVIA 9, you might find the 7 lacking if you're using it in an extremely bright room. Probably not, but it is a possibility. Consider your room's characteristics and choose accordingly. Another clear advantage for the BRAVIA 9 is the viewing angle. The BRAVIA 7's angle is subpar. It lacks Sony's X-wide angle technology, so anyone watching it off-center will see a faded, washed-out image. Black levels look raised from an angle of only 14 degrees, and the gamma noticeably shifts from 17 degrees onwards. The BRAVIA 9 won't be winning any awards for its viewing angle, far from it, but it's a step up from the 7. The image on the 9 looks mostly consistent from a slight angle, but there's slight gamma shifting and color washout that worsens the further you move off-center. The image really degrades starting at 46 degrees off angle, which is when the image noticeably suffers from brightness loss. So the TV isn't a very good choice for an ultra-wide seating arrangement. But the BRAVIA 7 is a poor choice for any wide seating arrangement. This part will be short. Both TVs have basically identical image processing. The BRAVIA 9 did have slightly better HDR native gradient handling, but it's extremely minor. You're a gamer? Well, these two TVs will perform basically the same. They have the same number of HDMI 2.1 ports, they support the same VRR technologies, and their input lag numbers are effectively the same. The BRAVIA 9 does, however, have a slight edge when it comes to response time. It's very minor, but there's a bit less blur and black smearing on the BRAVIA 9. We're nitpicking here. For most people, they look identical in action. So, are you surprised at the results? There's no doubt that the BRAVIA 9 is a splendid TV. It is indeed, and again, at the time of this video, it is the best LED TV we've ever reviewed. It will outperform the Bravia 7 in certain contexts, such as when watching content mastered at 4000 nits, or when you're watching content in a very bright room due to the Bravia 9's SDR brightness and far better reflection handling. But in most contexts, frankly, the two TVs are very close. For most people, the Bravia 7 is going to be plenty enough for their needs. We'd recommend the Bravia 9 only to those who are looking for the best of the best, no matter the cost. If you like to watch your TVs in super bright rooms, or if you like to watch a lot of content that was mastered at 4000 nits. Otherwise, stick to the Bravia 7. Looking for alternatives? Well, we wouldn't recommend the Hisense U8N for someone shopping for a Bravia 9. But we would for someone shopping for a Bravia 7. The Hisense U8N is just as good as the Bravia 7, which means it's that close to the Bravia 9, but for a much lower price. The Hisense has better contrast than the Bravia 7. It's also a bit brighter than even the Bravia 9, with even better reflection handling. All that for a fraction of the price. It's also better for gamers due to its lower input lag and superior response time. And it's capable of up to 4K at 144 Hz on its two HDMI 2.1 ports, while the Sony TVs are limited to 120 Hz. The U8N does have strange VRR and response time quirks, as its response time performance changes when the refresh rate goes above or below 100 Hz, which is likely to be annoying for PC gamers. You lose something else by going with the cheaper Hisense. It is significantly less accurate than the Sony TVs, with worse image processing. The Bravia 9 also competes with OLEDs, as its big claim to fame is its OLED-like contrast. In practice, it's not quite as deep as an OLED, but it's getting there. The Sony A95L doesn't get nearly as bright as the Bravia 9, but the A95L does have that near-perfect OLED viewing angle. If you like to host large viewing parties, it's hard to beat an OLED. The A95L also has the edge for gamers due to its near-instantaneous response times. Unfortunately, the A95L loses quite a bit of its brightness in game mode, which doesn't happen on the Bravia 9, the Bravia 7, or the Hisense U8N for that matter. But ultimately, when considering the A95L versus the Bravia 9, it really is a darkroom versus bright room debate. If you're hesitating, the Bravia 9 is the most versatile of the two. Well, that's all for our comparison of the Sony Bravia 7 and Sony Bravia 9. If you want a more detailed write-up on the TVs, check out our written reviews. The links are in the description below. Until next time, I'm Abby from RTINGS.com, where we help you find the best product for your needs. If you like what we do here and want to be a part of it, good news! We're hiring. We're currently looking for a display specialist that loves TV tech just as much as we do. If you're interested in learning more or seeing what other positions are open, follow the link to our careers page in the description below.